This is a 16-part series showing 16 different legendary builds on all 3 classes, all 5 subclasses. I'll be using 16 different exotic armors, 16 different exotic weapons, and 32 different legendary weapons, along with 0 artifact mods. And I will be showing these builds applied over 16 different solo flawless legendary missions. The playlist will be on my channel, dim links will be in the description, and if you enjoy the content, please let me know by leaving a like, a comment, subbing, all that good stuff. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy and let's get into it. Alright, welcome back to part 4 of my legendary build series. This time I am showcasing a Stasis Hunter build, Revenant, using Mask of Bakris as the exotic armor piece. Wither Horde is the exotic weapon of choice. Not to say that Wither Horde is necessary for this build, but because I'm using 16 different exotics and 16 different exotic weapons, I had to put Wither Horde with one of the builds, and I just think it looks cool when you get a Duskfield grenade placed down and then you have a Wither Horde pool in the same area. So it's just kind of a nice synergy. It looks really cool. Like, I love doing it on Voidwalker with Chaos Accelerant Vortex grenades as well. You could put down a big huge Vortex grenade and have a Wither Horde pool go on in the center of it at the same time. It's basically just kind of like supercharges your grenades in a sense. And Wither Horde just has excellent utility all around. As well as it gives me the ability to stick shielded enemies, because regardless of, like, if phalanxes put their shield down, you know, if I don't have a anti-barrier weapon or armor piercing rounds or a wave frame grenade launcher, I can just stick them with a Wither Horde and that'll take care of them. So now, so what's so special about Mask of Bakris? Well, it gives us some pretty cool effects. When we dodge, instead of doing a normal dodge, you're gonna do like a blink that is gonna transport you like 10-15 feet across the map, where you're invisible basically for that blink period. And then it activates the exotic trait Light Shift, which gives us a damage buff to our arc weapons and also to slowed enemies. So kind of a neat synergy there with arc and stasis. So if you really like using arc weapons, or if there's an arc surge in a particular mission, or there's a lot of arc shields, or you just need jolt for something like stunning overloads or ad clear, then you may want to consider running Stasis Revenant with your arc weapons, because it is actually the best way. You get the most damage for your arc weapons from this exotic helmet. And this isn't an arc build. I'm not on Arc Strider. Even if I was on Arc Strider, there's nothing that I could do to get more damage out of my arc weapons other than running Mask of Bakris, which is pretty interesting. So it's about an 8-second period. The buff will show on the left side of the screen. It says Light Shift. And so if you really want to capitalize on it, you basically get a you get some enemies slowed, and then you dodge, or you can also slow them from your dodge if you get close enough, because I'm using what's it called, Winter's Shroud, which is when you dodge, it slows enemies that are close to you. And then, so I think the stats for it are, you get a 10% damage buff to slowed targets, regardless of what weapon you're using, and you get 10% to your arc weapons. So if you combine your arc weapons with slowed targets during light shift, you're basically getting like a multiplicative damage buff, you know, somewhere in the 20% range to those targets, which is pretty good for not having radiant, not having any debuff, no arcs, weapon surges. You know, that's just straight, you know, nearly 20% extra damage from doing a dodge. So it's interesting, and it's I enjoy the dodge. I enjoy the mobility of it. One thing to consider though, when you're using light shift, there's no your cooldown doesn't begin to recharge for your dodge until light shift is expired. So for 8 seconds straight during light shift, you're not going to get any class ability regeneration at all. So because of that, I don't recommend that you use any mods or fragments or anything to kind of kickstart your dodge. You know, without, like, having 100 mobility is fine, because once your light shift is expired, then your dodge recharge can just remain at, you know, at maximum speed just from having tier 10 mobility. That's fine. I'm not saying that you can't use something like class distribution, or, you know, when you dodge, you get class ability energy back, like a kickstart, or something like bolstering detonation, or the melee one that gives you class energy. You can use those. I'm just not recommending that you do, including the fragment. There's a fragment that you can use with all the stasis subclasses, that when you defeat slowed or frozen targets, you get class ability energy. So you might, it might be intuitive to think, because if you want to capitalize on light shift from the exotic, you might be thinking, I want to dodge as much as possible. But the problem with that is that whenever light shift is active, there is nothing that you can do to increase your class ability energy. So that means that you could be potentially wasting your mods and your fragments by engaging with them or activating them while light shift is active. So I just find that it's way smoother to play without anything enhancing your class ability regen, other than having tier 10 mobility. And even then, if you don't feel like you need tier 10 mobility, don't bother. Because it doesn't increase the cooldown that much more, but it does help. And I'm just in the habit of running tier 10 mobility on basically all my hunter builds, because I like the consistency of not just the dodge cooldown, but the jump itself. I don't ever have to put on stompies or whatever to make a jump somewhere, like in a dungeon or jumping puzzle. It just, if I have tier 10 mobility, I'm pretty much good. Doesn't matter what the subclass or the build is. So that's just how I like to build into my mobility, but it's not to say that you have to go tier 10 mobility. So instead of wasting mods and fragments to get your dodge back faster, just focus on getting your Duskfields back as fast as possible. Like, if you can have back-to-back Duskfields, then that gives you the opportunity to shut down, you know, an area. Shut down all the enemies that are around over and over, and that gives you more survivability, and, you know, you're killing enemies faster because they're frozen, they're shattering. And with Whisper of Rending as one of the fragments, I'm doing 40% more damage to frozen targets with primary ammo, not including light shift. So And then as far as slowing enemies, other than Duskfields, I have a loop that I play into. I know I kind of went sidetracked off of how to get Duskfields back a little bit faster, but I'll get into that in a minute. I just want to mention that I have a couple different ways to slow enemies, which applying slow stacks will eventually freeze them. It'll also keep the enemies off me. And the way I could do that is, well, obviously with hunters, the shuriken charged melee ability, you get 2 of those, and if you hit one enemy with 2, they'll freeze. If you hit them with 1, they'll slow. And then with Gambler's Dodge, I can get my charged melee back right away just by dodging near an enemy. And then with Winter's Shroud as one of my aspects, dodges are also applying slow. So if I want, I could turn slowed targets into frozen targets just like that, by throwing my shuriken at them first, then dodging near them, and then they're frozen, and then I have both of my melee charges back. So Gambler's Dodge plus Winter's Shroud is a really good combo, has a lot of synergy, and you're going to be slowing and freezing more targets from it. I'm also pairing that with Whisper of, I believe it's Durance, which increases the time that targets are slowed by. Doesn't matter how I slow them, but all slowed targets will just be slowed for that much longer. So, keeping in mind that I have charged melee basically on demand because of Gambler's Dodge, and because I have 2 charges, which is just, you know, part of the Revenant build, part of the subclass. Like you just that's what you're given with Revenant. You have 2 charges. But so keeping that in mind, that can help me get Duskfields back faster by running double impact induction and double bomber, right? So all the things that I'm doing to slow targets, like dodging and throwing my shuriken, that's all also increasing my Duskfield energy. So the gameplay loop would go like, go into into a mob of enemies, throw Duskfield grenade first, and then I can use my melee, I can use my dodge, and then I'm going to have a Duskfield back, because impact induction gives you grenade energy from charged melee damage, or just melee damage in general. And then bomber on your class item is when you dodge, you get grenade energy. So that loop of slowing targets from Gambler's Dodge and Winter's Shroud and my charged melee, that feeds in those are subclass fragments and abilities that I'm complementing with combat mods on my armor. And so this is basically giving me the ability, if I just play this loop, I'll have constant Duskfield grenades. And then also to get Duskfields faster, I'm using Whisper of Shards, right? So I already mentioned that I'm using Whisper of Shards, but that's giving me grenade energy, like I think it's something like 500% more grenade energy for 8 or 10 seconds after breaking a stasis crystal. So whenever I throw my Duskfield, I just got to shoot the crystal, and then I've got insane grenade energy for a few seconds. Right, so that's the Touch of Winter stasis crystals that you get from Duskfield grenades. If you are doing a similar build and you have more ways to produce stasis crystals, that's just going to give you more uptime on Whisper of Shards and stasis ability regeneration, and that's great. Go for it. You can put Headstone run headstone on a weapon, the new Vergless Curve exotic bow with the hail barrage. You know, there's quite a few ways to produce crystals, so you can get creative with it. Also, you can use Demolitionist on your weapons. So like on Tarnished Metal here that I crafted from Season of Plunder, I just so happen to put Enhanced Demolitionist and Enhanced Explosive Payload. So even though it's a primary weapon, it's not necessarily the greatest Demolitionist weapon. It is still giving me some grenade energy on kills. It's not as great as a special weapon or like a machine gun, but it is something. So Whisper of Shards, Impact Induction, Bomber, Demolitionist, those are all the fragments and combat mods and weapon perks that I'm using to get more Duskfield grenades. And of course I'm running tier 10 Discipline as well. And you could argue for using Font of Focus. The font mods, which I briefly went over at the end of my last video. Basically, if you use a font mod and you have armor charge, you're going to get 30 more stat points to whatever font that corresponds to. So I could run tier 7 Discipline and I will have tier 10 Discipline just from picking up armor charge with Font of Focus, but I'm not using that. But that's something that you may want to consider using in order to bump up your Discipline stat and get more Duskfield grenades. I just happen to have good enough armor on this build to have triple 100s in Mobility, Resilience, and Discipline. So that's what I did, because then I'm not relying on armor charge. And because of the playstyle of Revenant, it's a little less of an up-in-your-face combat type of build. It's more of a ranged weapon build. So it's not always practical to get up there and pick up Orbs of Power and keep uptime on your armor charge. So when I'm trying to prioritize certain aspects of a build, which in this case would be having lots of Duskfield grenades and lots of dodge energy, then I'm gonna I don't care about the fonts that much. I just want, if possible, to have tier 10 stats and not have to supplement with fonts. Which, by the way, like if you are already tier 10 Discipline, you're not going to get any benefit from running the font for Discipline. Like, you're not going to have, you know, tier 13 Discipline. Like, if you're going to use a font, try and just cap your Discipline stat at 7 or whatever stat that corresponds to whatever font you're going to use. If you go over tier 7, then you're just kind of wasting stats. There might be a very minuscule benefit to running the font with tier 10 Discipline. Like, I'm not 100% sure, but with the diminishing returns that you get once you get to tier 10, like, you're really not getting anything. It's not an efficient placement of a mod if you're already tier 10. Save that mod slot, save the energy for something else. And then also I've got tier 5 Strength, which if you'd like for your 4th stat, you can totally go all in with Recovery. I just so happen to have tier 5 Strength, and if I really wanted to run like Marksman's Dodge instead, and say I didn't want to use Winter Shroud, I just want to dodge to get my grenade energy, dodge to reload my weapons. And because I'm not using Gamblers, I'm not getting as much melee energy. Because I have tier 5 Strength at base, if I really wanted to, I could stack 2 Font of Vigors, which is the Strength fonts, to get an extra 50 stat points. So basically the way it works is if you stack So one copy of a font will give you 30. 2, you're starting to get diminishing returns, which is the same thing for basically all stackable mods. So in this case, like I said, 30 stat points on the first copy. The second copy is going to give you 20 stat points. So if you have tier 5 in anything, keep in mind you could turn that into tier 10 just by stacking 2 font copies. But I didn't need that for this build particularly because I'm running Gambler's Dodge. You know, I've got as much charged melee energy as I need. And then that brings me to armor charge. What am I using for my armor charges? I don't think I'm using any fonts because, like I said, I got good base stats. But I am using 1 arc weapon surge mod. If you can stack more, go for it, but I didn't really feel it was necessary. So I get an extra 10% more arc damage while I have armor charge on top of Mask of Bakris, giving me up to 20%, on top of Whisper of Rending, giving me another 40% on frozen targets. So anyways, that's it for this one, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.